Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longrie. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. Now this evening, I have with me Councilmember Loren Sederstrom from the City of Grant. And we've had the pleasure of having him on our program once a month to give us an update on what is going on in the City of Grant. Now, it used to be that Mr. Loren Sederstrom had a program that was called All Around Grant. So thus, that is why we call it the All Around Grant Special Edition, because it's an opportunity for Mr. Sederstrom to show some clips from the recent City Council meetings and also to talk about some of the issues facing a small community on the fringe of the metro area. So with that, thank you, Mr. Sederstrom, for being here once again.
Well, thank you for having me. It sure is a pleasure to be here and discuss some of the issues. This last week has been very exciting. We went from, earlier in the month, have budget meeting, talking about tax increases and been fighting over that. Then we're going to talk about free speech. There also has been a development where a man bought some property in Grant and he has a Hydrovac company. And for those people that don't know what that is, it's like a pressure washer. So instead of when they dig up a sewer break, for example, they cut the tar open and then they put high pressure water and make a muddy slurry, and then they suck it up into the vacuum truck, and that way no big claw from a backhoe breaks any of the other utilities that are underground. Well, that's wonderful, but a man bought 12 acres and took a 3-acre open field and started digging holes and started pumping all the slurry, and he's got a mound 10 to 15 foot high all the way around his property from this dirt he's bringing in. And normally that would be a commercial operation, and he doesn't have a conditional use permit for that. But he did go to the water district and get a permit for digging rocks and trying some equipment. Then when about 6 neighbors complained, they gave him an extension that they could dump a few, and he's supposed to be testing it, it isn't. So it's really quite a large operation. We count anywhere from 15 to 20 trucks are dumping a day, thousands of gallons of mud. And he has a pit with a filter on it so the water sinks into the ground, the dirt is left, and he piles it up. And it now looks like, instead of a flat field, it looks like a little mountain range.
Wow. And and this, of course, is right on the heels of the City of Grant looking at all the conditional use permits that are on the books and determining which ones need to be revoked or which ones need to be updated, or in the case of what we talked about last month, where one council member lodged a complaint against another council member to ensure that he was having a conditional use permit, and even hauled him into court to enforce him having a conditional use permit when he in fact, arguably could have been grandfathered in.
Well, he could have.
And so that's why I find this fascinating that now you've got this new use in the community that really should require a conditional use permit, and yet, let's just look the other way.
Well, not only that, it's a commercial activity. Let's look at the level of activity, Diana, in that. We're not talking 1 truck, 2 trucks. We're talking 15 to 20 trucks per day dumping. And these are not little trucks. These have the standard tandems, axles in the back, 2 of them, and then they got a tag, 1 in front and 1 in back, a pusher and a puller. So there's 4 axles on the back. We're talking thousands of gallons. And, in the man's advertisement, he says he also does hazmats. In other words, he'll suck up like gasoline spills or whatever else. So we don't know what's going in the ground.
Right.
And the mayor is currently just, he's got permits. He doesn't look, he doesn't care. There's been, on my city emails, there have been a number of people who have called. And we'll be plugging in a picture here shortly of him. We have him of dumping an actual vac truck, so you can see the brown slurry coming back out. And again, he dug a hole, put a mat underneath there to hold the dirt in, but the water then sinks into the water table. And I don't know if that's what I want going into my water table. Or my land is right across the street, so I'm not particularly happy. I have not made a complaint about this. Our formal complaint policy is we have to write it and sign it, and I haven't done that. I did ask the building inspector when I saw the big holes going in there. I said, what's going on? Is he building a house? And he said, no. And he went out and looked, oh, he's just doing this. And then they went to the watershed district. And I mean, talking about a very laid back approach. I mean, and interesting enough, I had a little pond dug, and right away the guy across the street sent the watershed district out, and I met with the person on Friday, and well, it's just the normal course of farming. You can farm seasonal wetlands. And doing what I did when I was on the Planning Commission, we defined the ordinance, and you're allowed to do that in the normal course of agriculture. And then there was about a 2-acre parcel that I did. I put a 30 by 60 pond, and then I seeded it in, fertilized it, limed it, and seeded it in right away. So it looks just beautiful and natural. But this monstrosity across the street, it looks like we have a new set of mountain ranges at Grant. But we're going to follow that. It's going to be put on the agenda the next city council meeting, so we see what happens with that. Should we launch into our first clips?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
This is going to be about taxes now.
From feast to famine, there has to be something in between, and that's the point I'm making. We also have to take care of our infrastructure. And the roads are crumbling, we need to do something. So, like I said at the last meeting, we're talking about the price of a meal at McDonald's, for Pete's sakes. It's
middle of the road and we have failing road.
Yep. And over the years, we put a lot more money into roads than we're doing it now. A lot of our
That is a never-ending conversation in the city of Grant, is how are we going to take care of our roads, considering the fact that, you know, you've got a combination of both roads that are gravel roads and those that are covered with a bituminous covering. And then the issue of how do you pay for the roads?
Well, what we're talking about is that they want to stay at 4% of an increase over last year. Now, mind you, we have spent 12 cents out of every tax dollar comes to the city of Grant. So 4% of the 12%. You know, so in other words, we're talking 1/4% that they're putting the taxes up. So the average home would go up $20. If they went to the increase that I was suggesting, it would be another $20. And I explained to them, that's a meal at McDonald's. So why don't we launch into the next?
Well, and I think another way of looking at it and putting it in perspective, because I will have to tell you, quite frankly, is that a lot of these budget meetings, I do hear elected officials say, well, that's just a cup of coffee, or that's just a meal at McDonald's. But if you want to put it in concrete terms for the residents, keep in mind, in the city of Grant, because you've got roads that are dirt roads. I mean, I grew up on dirt road. I know that if you have a dirt road that is washboardy or that it's got holes in it, you know what it does to your car, to your suspension system? Do you know how much it costs to replace the suspension of your vehicle and the wear and tear on your tires? And so certainly for the residents of your community, that is a very important point, is it better to spend the extra $20 a year to have good maintained roads, or having to have to plan for $500 to $1,000 worth of car repairs because you live on a washboard road?
Well, that's an excellent point. And the other complicating factor, which makes it easier for the residents, most of the main thoroughfares in the city are county. We've only got about 3 roads, McCusick, Keswick, Joliet, it's for example, that are actually main feeder roads where there's like 50 to 100 houses on. So that's all we have to do is take care of 3 or 4 feeder roads. And you know, the whole point is if you live in a county road, that's fine. You don't have to drive on it, but you don't just drive on county roads. You visit a neighbor, you drive on a city road, you go somewhere else. So what I'm saying is if everybody pays just a minimal amount, another $20, we can fix those 3 or 4 roads that need fixing. And while even the people in the county road, yeah, they're not on that road, but we can smooth and take the pain away from those few residents, because their current road policy is if you want your road, you got to pay for it to fix it. And then they're talking $6,000, $8,000.
Right, exactly.
And so if you spread it over the whole, and we're talking about the greater good, it's health, safety, and welfare for everyone in the city, not just the ones that live on county roads.
Mm-hmm.
So,
exactly, good point. Now set it up for the next clip that we have coming up next.
Okay, this is another comment about about raising the taxes to a different level where it costs $32
5%, you said it's about $26 in the average home.
Right, and so it would be like another $12. Right?
So if we
But it
had a
had
7% increase, we would we'd be at a whopping $32. Maybe we can start repairing some of our infrastructure. And when you set your levy right now, we've got till December to send in our final levy or budget, right? Our final number has to go in the county by when?
September 30th. September 30th. September 30th, the 30th of this month.
Okay.
And then in December, we have the final levy meeting.
Yep.
And you can decrease your levy, but you cannot increase it.
That's my point. You can decrease it, but you cannot increase it. So if we're going to 7% now and being, we go to $36, we could drop that in December. Or $32, whatever, $32. I don't think we're talking at $32. You're going to raise somewhat income. You might see that if we spent our money, like on this road project coming up, and spent more in the difference between what the homeowner is going to do through assessment and what we would normally do through graveling, seal coating, pothole repairs, maybe talking to the citizens and going a few more dollars. The city put in the field, the long-term savings would be much greater to the citizens. Once it's done, you would actually be saving money on that maintenance.
That speaking is Councilmember Larry Lanou.
Yep.
Next to him, of course, is yourself on the one side, but on the other side is the mayor, Mayor Huber. And I couldn't help but watch the facial expressions on his face and the body language. It was very
Disrespectful, to say the least.
yes, and dismissive and like laughing about this issue. Now, this is a serious issue for the community. It's not a laughing matter. So even though he doesn't agree with Councilmember Lanou, which you can definitely get from the body language, he doesn't have to be necessarily condescending and dismissive of it. And before we get started with hearing your comments about this, I want to point out to our viewers something very important here, is that I believe that all cities should be cable casting their meetings having to do with their city budget. But in the city of Grant, this meeting wasn't being cable cast by the city now, was it?
No, this was, I brought a camera so that so I could show the residents the discussion and what's going on. They're raising, to meet inflation, the budget by actually the total tax budget of each citizen, 0.25%. So we're going to 12% to 12.25% on their tax bill. So, that's not a lot of money to run a city on. We have a portable toilet outside. We don't even have it in the town hall that's over 100 years old. And we don't have a lot of assets. All we have are our roads. And they really don't even want to fix those.
With our next clip that we have coming up next, set up that clip for our viewers.
Okay, public comment. It is never videotaped. So when it's played over channel 16, the government channel, you never see what the residents say. However, I brought a camera, and we have two clips here that give example of public comment. So if we could play the first clip, it's just a short one. It's about 40 seconds, but we'll talk on the other side.
Okay.
See if you like. Mr.
Point
Keeley,
of order, I'd like to hear from him.
That's nice.
I would too.
It's fantastic. I've been given the power by other council people to pick people that come up here and talk to us.
I don't
And
believe
you
you
are not.
Finally, you're welcome to
And
come to
you
the
are
podium.
not.
Maybe you'd like to
Well,
state what
you
you'd
come
like
up
to
here.
do.
You can take a break while you discuss it with the attorney if you'd like, but you won't be speaking tonight. Is there anyone else?
That might lead you into litigation.
Go ahead, Mr. Ross.
Point of
Have a
order.
seat, Mr. Kinley.
I like point of order.
Have a seat, Mr. Kelly.
I like point of order.
Hitler then?
No, I don't think so. I had your party
Damn
to
close to it.
vote it in. Mr. Dross?
It appeared to me that somebody got up, they wanted to speak, and the mayor was telling them, no, we're not going to listen to you tonight. And then right after that person, another person got up, and it looks like they're going to listen to him.
Oh, we could have put it on there, but that was Jim Drost. He's in the planning commission. He's part of the Huber cronies, They stack the planning commission with their buddies, and I think the last month we showed Huber talking to his cronies in the back room, back of the room between the breaks, okay? So that's kind of how that goes. Well, we have a second clip in public comment. Why don't we play that and we can discuss that on the other side.
Okay.
Well, then we'll be quiet if you don't mind. Is there anyone else? Thank you very much, sir.
You're denying my you're denying my constitutional rights.
Anyone else? Your constitutional rights to your First Amendment do not guarantee you a venue, sir. When they start guaranteeing you a venue, then you can speak at my council meeting. Until
It's a
then,
public,
be quiet.
it's a
Have
public
seat,
comment.
please. Have a seat,
Talk to your
please.
attorney.
Have a seat, please. I have the power to do so, Mr. Finley. It's unfortunate that I do what I do. Anyone else?
Well, that,
Mr. Sept, have a chat with us.
Yes, indeed.
That is very fascinating. There is no state law or constitutional right that you have and can stand before the city council and talk. But if the council opens it up to public comment, they can't be selective as to who they pick and choose. It has to be open to all, and that all are treated the same, and that you cannot regulate the content of the speech. So if they open it up to public comment, they have to have it open to all comers to that meeting, and they cannot regulate the speech. So that is very fascinating, the way he was wagging the Mayor Huber, wagging his finger at the individual who wanted to get up to speak.
Well, he thinks he's King Huber, and he thinks the city of Grant is his fiefdom. I think maybe next meeting I should bring him a Burger King crown, and he can wear it. But the kind of tying into that, we have a newspaper article. This is from the St. Paul Pioneer Press on Thursday, and it said, court voids law in public meeting disturbances. Justice say 1963 state statute is unconstitutional. Minnesota's long-standing law against disturbing public meetings violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, the Supreme Court said. That law passed in '63. An action that disturbs an assembly or meeting in a reasonable knowledge that will tend to alarm, anger, or provoke others, an assault or breach of the peace qualified as disorderly, a misdemeanor. But the review of a woman's conviction for holding signs with graphic images of dismembered children at a Little Falls City Council meeting, the Supreme Court found the law was overbroad and potentially criminalized free speech. An individual could violate the statute only, for example, by wearing an offensive t-shirt, using harsh words and addressing another person, or even raising one's voice in speech. There were countless ways the law could prohibit and chill protected expression. Okay. In '78, the court that found part of the law to be constitutional, rather than tossing it out entirely, they ruled it for only so-called fighting words language intended to provoke confrontations. This new ruling changes that. The woman charged with disturbing will have her conviction vacated. So again, of course, I don't know if Mayor Huber thinks the laws of the state and the national apply to him because he's got his little fiefdom. But they keep changing the laws, and again, as we've said before, they don't follow Robert's rules, and we'll have a clip on that a little bit later. They don't follow the League of Minnesota Cities. They change rules like on the consent agenda so they can load it up with whatever they want, including contracts that are over $100,000 that by law you have to have at least 2 bids on. They load it up in the consent agenda, then they've changed the rules. Oh, there has to be a one person and a second to get the consent agenda, get an item off it, and then it has to be voted on by the majority of the council. It's a 3-2 council. The same thing with the regular agenda, and we'll see an example of that coming up in this next clip.
Right, and what I'd like to say is that when you say that they change the rules, it's really that it's the mayor who, in their position as being the parliamentarian, is making arbitrary and capricious decisions as to how he wants to maneuver around not allowing the minority council members to speak or participate, or members of the public as well. And of course, if somebody were to challenge that, I mean, that would be the basis, is that there's no rational connection between how they're proposing to do something and why the change.
And we're going to see two examples of that. First of all, they have to approve the agenda and then the consent agenda, and that goes around our next two clips. This clip is going to be on the agenda, and we'll talk on the other side.
Okay.
Add into the agenda.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Got a motion and a second.
Yep, go ahead and tell us what you want to add, Larry, very quickly, otherwise I'm going to start banging the hammer.
Add in a discussion item. I'd like to add the GRP parade for discussion.
Absolutely not. In my opinion, anyone else like to add the GRP parade?
No.
Okay,
Nope, that's it. You're done. We have another motion on the floor. Yours.
Really? You didn't know if I
Yours.
had one or two items that I'd like to add?
Yours was there. First, we're going to take that. We're going to take them one at a time, Larry, and then we're going to discuss whether or not we want to do that again. Who would like to put the
running a dictatorship.
Who would like?
He cuts them off. He has a couple things he wants to change, and that's the way the meetings go. Okay, that's the regular agenda. You see, we have a tractor parade that we just had on the 9th, and I filmed it. I have it on my YouTube channel, so if you want to see some tractors and floats, go to YouTube and type in All Around Grant, and it's about 18 or 19 minutes. But we have too much to cover to put it on this show. And they wanted to talk about that because they changed the name and they want to make sure they have insurance for this parade. Okay, and he won't even talk about that. Now, the next thing we're talking about the consent agenda.
And yet that is a community event.
That's right.
It's a community event, and I think that in my viewing of other communities' council meetings, it is very customary for council members to say that there's something that they would like to put on the agenda as part of their council presentation to talk about community events, whether or not if it is the pickup day for trash, that's the community day for picking up trash, or whether or not if it's some other event going on at the Historical Society, which is not necessarily a government-sponsored event, but that council members have that opportunity. It appears to me that the council members who are in the minority, yourself being one of them, that you cannot even use that as an opportunity to talk about those community events of which you as council members are involved in.
Well, what's interesting, this is the only community-wide event we have. And we have about 4,000 people in the city of Grant, and we get a 20% participation rate. So we have about 800 people, that is a significant rate of participation for a city. When you have 20% of the population coming out, and we have the parade, we have a picnic. And so them not even allowing to talk about it is just really pathetic. The next clip we have, now we're going to go to the consent agenda, and we see how they avoid changing that. Now remember, the consent agenda is something that's made for things that need no discussion. The electric bill, the phone bill, the gas bill, those things, they don't need discussion. But if there is something on there, for example, like a telephone bill, if it had a lot of long distance calls, a member could pull it off and say, hey, I want to discuss this. Where's all the long distance coming from? But you'll see how they handle the consent agenda.
Was first this time, gentlemen. Just because you yell louder doesn't mean you're first. Mr. Carr was first. He was first. It was obvious he was first. Mr. Carr is first.
That's how they handle the consent agenda. They're just, and I didn't even hear Carr say a word. And it's just kind of a setup ahead of time. It's slam bam, thank you, ma'am. You know, they won't let things, and they put the appointment list on the consent agenda. They put contracts on the consent agenda, and that's just how they operate. So the democracy really isn't functioning. You need the voice of the majority must prevail, but you must also hear the voice of the minority, and that is not happening in Grant.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the next clip, what are we going to be viewing here?
Well, we're going to be talking about Robert's rules, and they question what rules are you following because they keep changing. Yeah, even Monopoly has a set of rules you follow, but the city of Grant, evidently, whatever King Huber decides to play by is the rules he's going by for the day. So we're going to talk about that.
Okay, are we using parliamentary procedure?
As defined by the League of Minnesota Cities, we are.
Good. The consent agenda on there says that it takes one person to remove an item from a consent agenda.
Lemieux, now.
Have you read the League of Minnesota Cities?
No, hang on. Hang on.
You said you're using not parliamentary, but League of Minnesota Cities.
Hang on, you've made your point. Let me answer you. Let me go ahead and answer you. How many times have we been through this? The city of Grant has
That's
its
why
own.
you're in litigation, Jeff, at the federal court. You should have showed up Friday. You would have found out a little bit more.
Mr. Lanoux.
Now, having been an elected official myself in the past, and having conducted meetings as the parliamentarian using the Roberts Rules of Order, there's a reason why you go by those rules, and it's to have a consistent protocol so that everybody knows what to expect at a meeting and how to address conflict. Also, it allows an opportunity for the minority voice to be heard. And it doesn't mean that the minority is necessarily going to be the prevailing side, but at least they have an opportunity to speak.
And bring out the issue.
That's right. And keep in mind that sometimes when the minority speaks during an issue, they actually, by bringing up different concepts, a different way of looking at it, or that they are persuasive, they could maybe persuade somebody from the majority to change their vote. And I know this can happen because it has happened in Maplewood when I was mayor. There were a number of times where I was in the minority, but because of that opportunity of being able to speak and fleshing out the ideas with the fellow council members, when it got to the time of taking a vote, suddenly the vote was on the other side, and suddenly I was in the majority. You see, that's part of that interaction of representing the people of your community, of having that community discussion.
Did you notice the use of the gavel? We have one of the only high mileage gavels in Minnesota.
Yes. How many has he gone through so far?
One or two, I think. I'm not sure, but I know he just bangs it incessantly. He's just one of the last council meetings, Mr. Lanoux grabbed it and put it over on the other side of him, and the audience just broke into laughter. Now we're going to talk about an overlay on 65th. This is kind of interesting because this is a dead-end cul-de-sac street, and there was an attorney there that made a formal complaint to take one of the charter commission members to court for using the logo, okay? And as a reward for that participation, they had their, of course, the people on the street signed for it to have their street redone, but that was kind of the reward. You know what I'm saying? You can't say it's a one-on-one, but they got a lot of consideration.
Well, they moved up the waiting list, put it that way.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And the interesting thing is, like the Winter Carnival, when you enter the contest, you design a logo, and part of the rules are you assign the rights so that the Winter Carnival can patent and copyright it. Well, the logo for the city of Grant, a home in the country, Mr. Vanzewald designed it, he submitted it, he never assigned the rights, and they've never patented or copyrighted it, yet they took him to court on that, because he had it on a mailer, and they prevailed at the Office of Administrative Hearings.
And to be clear, though, that this mailer that it was used on was regarding the establishment of a charter for the city of Grant. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like somebody was taking it and using it personally as some commercial venture.
And the charter
we're talking about something that is quasi-governmental function.
And the city had requested the charter commission by the judge to be set up. So it was initiated by the city, so why would they sue someone that was on the charter commission voting to get the charter passed when they initiated the charter effort? It doesn't make any sense.
And then that case, though, it was determined that that was a misuse then of that
It went to the Supreme Court.
logo. Okay.
Now,
but the Supreme Court they declined to review it, correct?
They did appeal it, and he's lost on appeal, so his only recourse, and for a $250 fine, how far do you go?
Right, right.
Rather than for principle.
But just to be clear, it wasn't actually reviewed by the Supreme Court.
It was
no. Okay.
But this is the clip, so let's roll that, please.
It is essentially a mill and overlay, but we're removing the full pavement depth of 2.5 inches.
They're pulling it all off.
So we're milling off the pavement.
Yeah.
Full depth.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's total reconstruct.
No, that's the base and everything.
Not necessarily. We're not removing the curb and gutter, and we're not redoing the storm sewer, and we're not doing those types of things.
Really, I'd like to see the curb and gutter and grant. I haven't seen that one yet.
Thank God. We live in the country, yeah.
You know, when I go home from a meeting, I'm almost sick to my stomach from having to, you know, I used to sit next to him, but after he assaulted me, and we reported that in the All Around Grant Show, that's a whole nother story, that's history, you know, you file a police report and they poo-poo it, and it's really interesting how they're like Teflon, and nothing sticks to these guys. Except we'll see. They run afoul in the Office of Administrative Hearing last fall, and they're going to run they're going to court again. They did file a false police report, and that's being currently investigated by a detective of the Washington County Sheriff's. So we're going to see what happens with that. I'm not holding my breath, but they do file false police reports. So they regularly review conditional use permits, or CUPs as they're called, the acronym. And so there were 3 of them coming up that they decided that weren't being used and were on the books and they wanted to get rid of. And so this is the first one. Let's talk on the other side.
Property owners or members of the public. In moving forward with the hearings, I would suggest that we do one hearing at a time on each of these different permits. Open the hearing, hold the public hearing, close it, and then have the council vote on whether or not vacating that particular conditional use permit is warranted, so that the record is clear as far as the process of each one.
Okay. So if I understand you then correctly, Mr. Sandstrom, you'd like these open one at a time for a public hearing. Once the public hearing concludes, you'd like it closed down and then the council to discuss the vacate action and then either move forward or do not move forward on that vacate action. Is that correct?
That would be my recommendation. I think that'll make for a clear.
Tell us how the city came to this point, to look at the books to determine what conditional use permits should be revoked.
Well, they were looking, I don't know, they have a staff meeting that city council members aren't allowed to attend. There are no minutes, so we never know what's being said. Things amazingly come up. The mayor has this city running on autopilot. The planner, the engineer, the building inspector, the attorney, and the city clerk just run the whole thing. They just come in with a recommendation. They say, okay, whatever you say, and they go and do it. You know, I don't know how much input he has in, so that's kind of interesting. And so the 3 ones they were talking about was one for a cell tower, one for a gun club, and then the Bel Air Sanitation conditional use permit that was on the school property that hadn't been used in over 10 years. And so they were getting rid of them. But we have some other interesting things on the other side of this, and that's what they're doing. So if we could play the next clip.
I've been notified. Out of here.
The other deal I'd like to ask you is, you want to clean them up and get the paperwork out of there, but I'm seeing that there's 3 or 4 of these at the conditional use permits that are issued haven't been recorded. And some of these are 7, 8, 10 years old, and it's still not recorded.
Tom has some history on this. Tom?
Okay, so you're talking, we've had a long history of CUPs that we didn't even know.
Unrecorded conditional use permits are the one for Wildwood School and the school district, so they're not on the books.
Oh.
How convenient. We're going to
So now, okay, so this then brings to mind something that I would puzzle over. Okay, so these conditional use permits, one for the Wildwood School, held by the school district, it's not recorded. And yet, certain council members have been very adamant that, say for instance, Council Member Larry Lanou, who was grandfathered into having a horse stable, that they were adamant that he had to have a recorded conditional use permit. So adamant about it that they brought him to court about it. So are they going to apply the same yardstick to the school district? Are they going to require them to go and get that conditional use permit?
Part of the reason,
and get it recorded and then bring them to court if they don't do so?
Well, you see what's going on is in their conditional use permit, they're required annual testing, and they have yet to test anything because in 2010 it was built in as little as last year. They've decreased the allowable minimums by 10,000 times. So in other words, they haven't tested anything, and that's why they don't want to record the conditional use permit, because then it'll be in black and white. And
but we're not talking about an old conditional use permit then. We're talking about something that was just issued
2010.
2010. So, and it's certainly one that's still in use today because the school is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And those ongoing obligations are still there. They just don't want them recorded so nobody can put the big thumb on them.
Well, 57 children have been pulled from Wildwood School for having headaches and nosebleeds during the school year and not during the summer.
But you see what the issue then is, and I think that this is good that you're bringing this out, is that by not having it recorded, then it's harder to ensure that the conditions of that conditional use permit are being enforced.
That's right.
Because if those conditions of the conditional use permit are not enforced, then that would give an opportunity for it to be revoked.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So without it being recorded and decreasing the opportunity for enforcement, well, you then won't ever have to worry about it being revoked for failure to meet the conditions.
Free pass.
I got it.
Free pass.
I see. And yet they held a different standard to others in the same community. Huh.
Interesting.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mr. Sederstrom, for putting that perspective on it.
Well, the next clip we have is a little bit long. It's the former commentator from Inside Insight. And he gets up and he has quite an interesting dialogue with the mayor. So if we could play that clip, please.
Financial and business interests in grants.
So you have no address in grant, sir, is that correct?
Mayor, that's it. That's
okay.
it. That's
Thank you,
that's
sir.
all just required. You gotta learn.
Thank you, sir.
Besides,
all right. Very good now.
You gotta learn. This is my time. You just said you're supposed to listen.
Thank you,
We're
sir.
supposed to talk. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank
now
you,
be quiet.
sir.
Thank you, Mayor. That's wonderful.
Careful.
It's hard for you to do.
Okay.
It's hard for you to do.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. Now I want to start out and comment what the acting attorney over there does and your comments. I don't believe that a public hearing, that when somebody asks a question, that you're prevented from responding to that. I don't know that that's part of a public hearing law. So when a citizen asks a reasonable question, I think a reasonable answer is in order. I'll start out with that. Now, second, on these conditional use permits, unless there's something in that conditional use permit to begin with that says if it's not utilized in a certain time period, it goes away, those conditional use permits have real value. The mayor talked about this with gravel pits. So regardless, that if there's a conditional use permit that has real value, I think the property owner has to certify some way, not a verbal conversation, but actually in writing, that they are requesting the removal of that conditional use permit. Now, the attorney over there said, well, you know, we have these old conditional use permits out there, and the neighbors move in, like around the gun range, Bald Eagle gun range up there.
We're talking school. Here's school now. Tell her. None of this bullshit that we're here on.
That's enough, sir.
Thank you, officer.
Mr. Zick, Mr. Zick, address the council, please.
Okay, so the neighbors move in, and pretty soon there's pressure to close the gun range down. Now, the city attorney over there, I would hope he was a smart guy, would tell the people that are buying property, you know, you need to do some research and find out what your neighbor's property can be used for. If there's a conditional use permit on there, even though it's not being used, you better know that. You don't get to come in and say, well, the airport has to go away or the train track need to move because I'm here and I want solitude. I want to believe I'm living in North Oaks in a gated community. It doesn't work that way. So now, the other concern I have is you're vacating these conditional use permits. It would be nice that we had a copy of those conditional use permits so we could see what the conditions are and how they apply. Now, this is the Wildwood School site, and so what conditions might be on that property, like the conditional use permit that says they have to monitor every year the pollutants in the ground. Now, I don't believe that's being done. So is this board going to enforce the conditional use permit?
Sir, the Bel Air conditional use permit that we are talking.
Now?
I'm going to go ahead and clarify here for the audience. The Bel Air conditional use permit has nothing to do with the school, and it certainly has nothing to do with testing. That would be the school CUP, which we are not talking about. I'm just trying to clarify your remarks for you, sir.
Well, that's fine, and I would hope you would clarify anybody else's question.
I shall attempt.
That would be real considerate of you,
Thank you.
Mayor. But again, I do not know what's in that conditional use permit that's on that property, because that conditional use permit went with that property in perpetuity. So now, if there's something in there that would protect the health and safety of the children, the teachers, anybody's there, I would hope that that's looked at and that we just don't vacate things that actually...
He was talking about just what we had been talking about, the enforcement of the conditional use permit that wasn't recorded. Now, the next clip is related to this. Larry Lanou talks about the Luss site, leaky underground storage tank, which is 280 feet from the school, perhaps why the children are getting all sick. Those are also the ones, when I was on the planning commission and the chair of the planning commission, they would not include in the book. Oh no, we didn't want to clutter the spec book. It was 2 inches thick and they didn't want to put 2 more pages in there. Man, that would really clutter it up. Gee whiz. So let's play that clip.
And that's where the Luss site was. The leaky underground storage tank, that's where the hot spots were. That's where the 6 soil borings that were not recorded when they approved the plans for this. Have you...
Approved the plans for what? The Bel Air sanitation site?
The school site where the transfer station was.
No, the transfer station was hundreds of yards from the school site.
No, it wasn't.
Sure it was. You're thinking of the waste transfer site that's currently on 75th and Jamaica, the active one, Waste Busters.
No, Mr. Huber, if you just sit down and listen,
well, go ahead.
I can get you drawings and bring them to you next week.
Very good, sir.
But the transfer station that had the 6 hot spots, and now you've got a pond down there, and it's between the natural gas station and the sanitary lift station that you have over there. You have a pond over there that does not hold water, correct?
I'm not aware.
Okay, you're not aware because you and I have talked about it in the past, all right?
I'm not sure which pond you're referring to, Larry.
The one right along 75th that's dry after a 2-inch rain. And my question is, how many times it says in their conditional use permit they must annually test twice a year all the ponds when the conditional use permit was...
We are not talking about the school's conditional use permit. The Bel Air, you're talking about a CUP for the school. The school has not been notified. We'll be talking about their CUP. We will not be talking about their CUP. We will be talking about the Bel Air.
If you go to the grant report and want to get the news, go to the grant report.
Yes, please. Enough. The National Enquirer.
The question I have in listening to this, because I'm not as intricately involved in it as you, obviously, but the area that had been covered by the Bel Air CUP, does that overlap with the CUP that the school currently has?
Yes, they're on the same site. It's basically the Bel Air sanitation CUP covers the same conditional use permit that the school has.
Okay, so it covers the same area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the school was granted their new CUP, the previous CUP that was on that property was not revoked at that time?
No.
So are there conditions that are in that CUP that remain conditions under the school CUP?
No, I don't believe so. But when they put the conditional use permit in for the school, there was biannual testing. In the
Right.
pond he's talking about is very interesting. They have to dig a settling pond in there. Now, the problem is they were supposed to put the sewer line in 10 feet away from any dump area. I have pictures of them excavating for the sewer line, and you can see the garbage coming out of the excavation that was in there. And this pond is right next to the sewer line,
Right.
so what happens is the water collects in there, and then it seeps down into the coarse base of the sewer line, and then it matriculates down into Lost Lake.
And I do, I do have to say that I agree with Mayor Huber's point that since the school CUP is not on the agenda and that they weren't given notice that their CUP was going to be discussed, that really isn't the issue for that night of talking about the revocations. But if there was overlapping between the CUP that's being revoked and that current CUP, well, that's something I think that had to be addressed, certainly at that point. But this other issue that you've brought up about the school CUP not being recorded, so that way the monitoring can be established and ensured and enforced, that is an issue. But I can see the point that the problem that you have as being a minority council member, you have no ability of putting that on the agenda so that it can be accomplished. And that is a different dilemma.
Oh, absolutely.
And you mentioned that one of the other CUPs that was being revoked that evening was for the cell tower. Now, was that because a cell tower had never been installed?
Well, what had happened is Costas applied for a cell tower. They went through the whole thing. Unfortunately, the former mayor, Gary Erickson's daughter, lived right next door, and they took him to court. And Mr. Costa spent $60,000 in court costs, and they got a decree from a judge that barred them from building the cell tower.
Oh, I
for
see.
whatever reason. And so that's why they got rid of that. He still is, they made him get a conditional use permit for his farm market, and it's a very prominent farm market in Grant. And they make him get a building permit every year to put up a temporary greenhouse. So there's a lot of Mickey Mouse in that.
So that's why I was curious about that cell tower CUP as to how it was that
it was negated.
That was, okay, because through a court order. Okay, that I understand. Okay, thank you.
Well, now we're going to the next thing where the plot thickens a little bit. They want to build a hockey rink on that.
They who?
Which would be Montemita. Well, actually, it's Rink 1, which is a bunch of hockey people that want to build it, and they want to build it and then on the school property. Well, on the school property, there is a recorded covenant that says nothing can be built on a municipal waste site, and that's supposed to be 15 feet deep, and it can never be, you can't break the top or bottom seal. Well, they came in and drilled down 30 feet, broke both the top and bottom seal, and found that there wasn't 15 feet of garbage in there, there was 30 feet. Then a little bit later, they came in and they surcharged the property, which means they put, when we had this on the program before, they put 20 foot of dirt on top of it to press everything down. Well, now, and then they came forward and wanted to annex 80 acres or something so they could build a hockey arena, and the majority voted it down. Now, as I understand, there's a hostile annexation going on where they want to annex all the way out to Jamaica, about 240 to 300 acres. So that's what this next clip is about, the annexation that's under the radar. So if we could play that.
Decided at the mayor's Montemita School District meeting. Also, are the citizens welcome to attend and record the school district and mayor's meetings without threat of arrest? Okay, you're discussing policy in these meetings and what you want to do and what you think, but press comes, they're under threat of arrest. I was. So where and when do these meetings take place? When the mayors get together and the school boards and the school administration, or a combination of these, and discuss these policies? And are minutes taken at these meetings as far as getting rid of the CUPs? So, who decided this? Was it Mayor Judd Marshall or Mayor Jeff Huber? Who decided to prepare the Matamidi School District and the 186 acres across the street for annexation into the city of Matamidi?
Well, now that's a puzzling question. Do you have any idea who's behind this move to annex the property to Matamidi?
Not just annex, a hostile annexation, because it was voted down by the city council.
Which city council?
Grant City Council voted the annexation down. There was a proposal made to annex, to let them have the 80 acres at the dump site with the sewer and water, because Grant has no sewer and water other than to the school, and also allow them to have 80 acres across the street out of the 160 or whatever, or a lot more than that. And the developer was going to give 10 acres to Grant for a park to add as a buffer. And they made that proposal, and it got voted down immediately. They wouldn't even listen to them. They voted against any annexation. And from talking to people involved in it, including an attorney that I will not name, they're going forward with that, except they want to annex more now. So they're going to take the whole 160 acres, the bank that's owned by Premier. They want the 80 acres from the school that Wildwood School is on. And I'm not 100% clear if I had heard once Judd Marshall said he wants to annex everything up to Jamaica, which would involve the Johnson's waste transfer site. And there's several hobby farms south of 12 going down with the same property. So that would drastically change a lot of people's lives. But that's currently, as I understand what's going forward, and they're currently in negotiations with the Met Council to do that.
So they want to remove that property out of the city of Grant and then have it be part of the city of Matamidi.
Yes, and they plan to build 320 homes. Of course, that means a lot of tax money. And Matamidi School District, has a 33% open enrollment. And now they're having a problem. Like I said, 57 children have dropped out of Wildwood, and they're not sending their children there. They won't take any more at O.H. Anderson. And there's quite a significant number of high school students that are open enrollment because they get a greater percentage a chance to play sports. If there's only a population of 150 people in a class, the chance to be one of the 18 players in the football team is a lot greater than if there's 300 people. You've just doubled your chances to be on the football team. So second-tier people from other districts like Stillwater or White Bear, if they can't get on the team, at second string at White Bear, they'll be first string at Matamidi. And that's just the way that goes. And they should have a school population of about 2,000, and they want to run her at 3,200. And that's what they've said before. And the taxes for Matamidi School District is 53 cents on the dollar. If you're in the Stillwater schools, it's 43 cents. And mind you this, they hire Stillwater for some special ed and the food lunch program. So it's very interesting what they're doing. They're spending money like drunk sailors in Matamidi, I'm here to tell you. They just gave the superintendent a raise, a bunch of people raises, and they're going for another levy. I was at a meeting where they authorized that they were going to get an $8.5 million levy to fix the parking lots of the 4 schools in the district center. I could have paved most of the city of Grant with $8.5 million. But again, Chuck Uyghur introduced that bill that for maintenance, you can have a levy that doesn't have to be voted on, and you can just put it in. And $8.5 million for 5 parking lots is a bit much.
Well, keep in mind, Senator Chuck Uyghur got his start being on a school board. So he certainly would want to make sure that he made sure there was legislation in place that would favor the top school district administrators and the projects they want to
And as I heard,
fund.
when he left the North St. Paul, he had the money flowing freely. It was quite interesting, as I understand. They had to stop the bleeding there after he left, I'm here to tell you. But anyway, well.
And then we have about a couple minutes left here. So I know that you had wanted to talk briefly about the outcome of a lawsuit that had just been dismissed out of federal court.
Well, it was very interesting. Tim Dewesky was accused with stalking a council member. They filed a false police report because he was never at the meeting. And he went to court, and it wasn't dismissed. They said there was no probable cause, so that it never should have been brought. Okay, so he was in there for that, for malicious prosecution, libel, because...
I mean, that's what the federal case was about.
Yes, that libel, a deprivation of civil rights, and conspiracy. Well, they moved it, the League of Minnesota Cities moved it from district court to Ramsey federal court. And it came back, the judge was, I think his name was Magnuson, said there was no evidence, and it was unbelievable. There were affidavits after affidavits. I don't know where this clown got his reading glasses, but it's unbelievable. And they think they're out of the woods. I don't think they will be necessarily, because one of the former council members published a letter and letters to the editor with multiple lies in it.
Well, and I guess what I'm puzzling over is that if the case was originally started in district court, why and how did the League of Minnesota Cities attorney, how were they able to remove it to federal court? Because I'm not certain that the questions and the claims that you're describing here are actually federal. Because certainly defamation claims, those are state claims. The other claims you talk about, they certainly sound like state claims to me.
The civil rights, the deprivation of civil rights and due process. Larry was censured, you know, and they took him to court to enforce the censure. And the court said, being that he was not allowed to testify at his own censure case, that they deprived him of his civil rights.
Yeah, but you have civil rights at the state level too, you see.
But you see,
and that's why, to me, I'm wondering, okay, so when this was dismissed out of federal court, so does it get to go back to district court?
Well, he dismissed it with prejudice, and that's a claim that's we're not sure of. But this judge, as I understand, was very lazy. I guess, I don't know, maybe this, in my opinion, the League of Minnesota Cities must own this guy, you know, to get him to throw it out like that. Because there was 220 pages in this suit, and it was rock solid. It was, I read it, and just on the basis of no probable cause for stalking alone. And the judge, I mean, there were 3 court decisions from lower courts that affirmed these people's claims. And how could a federal judge say, well, they don't count? They were never appealed. So if you don't appeal a verdict, as I understand, it still stands and is considered public record and is considered to be true. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, it's still standing.
You know, so...
I mean, there's plenty of orders and verdicts out there that people might argue whether they're true or not.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying...
But they stand.
They stand. And these orders, how can a federal judge say they don't count? When 3 cases in district court, Washington County District Court, came up with the verdicts. I can't comprehend that.
Right. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I don't see how it's a federal case. So if he dismissed it because they're not federal claims, I could understand that. So I guess
he said lack of evidence is what he claimed. But it's not done. It's not over. So we're going to see what happens, where it goes. But again, it's very interesting. There's still some more litigation going on, and the 3 musketeers may be brought to justice yet. We'll see. We're hoping.
There's still the outstanding claims of campaign practices complaints.
That's right.
That has not been heard yet. Certainly not disclosing certain contributions and accepting contributions over the campaign limit. Thank you, Mr. Sederstrom. It looks like we're at the end of our program so soon. And we'll have to have you come back next month for an update.
Oh, we will. We'll let you know what's happening all around Grant.
Thank you. And viewers, we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.